Blog Talk Radio.
You're listening to Critical Mass Radio. Now it's our turn. The Razor's Edge Show. If the truth hurts, prepare for pain.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the Razor's Edge Special, the Occult Beatles. Something I've wanted to do for a bit. The time's finally right, I think. A bit of a departure from the usual spewing of bile at the New World Order, or hate speech, as some of our friends have described the content of this show. I beg to differ, but, everyone's entitled to their opinion, aren't they? I've been promising this more in-depth look at the Beatles and this culture, pop culture, and the Beatles and their role in the situation that we currently find ourselves in. Later on in the show, I'll be joined by a couple of chaps with definite interests and expertise in this field. We've got George from the Prisoner Show, who is a musician, a good one as well, so his knowledge will be invaluable, and he's from Liverpool, so right at the heart of the storm. We've also got Philip, a regular in the Critical Mass Radio chat room, whose knowledge on music is second to none, I've found. He's got a real depth of knowledge about the music and the music industry. Spoke to him quite in depth on last Sunday when we had the Critical Mass Radio launch party. Fantastic night for all those that were there. So that's something to look forward to. You'll notice on those that are actually on criticalmassradio.co.uk listening live to the Razor's Edge show, you will notice on the site that we have pictures there of various album covers and things to do with the Beatles. We'll get back to them later on in the show, but just a bit of advice about that. When we look at a picture, which we will be doing, if you right-click the picture with your mouse and choose open link in a new window, that way you stay on the Critical Mass site and you get to look at the picture while we're talking about it, rather than just looking at the picture and you lose the show and the Critical Mass Radio site. So right click and open in a new window for those pictures. That's in a bit. Right, I've got an email that I received about 4 or 5 weeks ago actually, but I've saved it specifically for this show that I had planned, and it goes back to the half-assed attempt at the Paul is dead theory that I made around that time. It comes from Dave from Huddersfield. I'll read that. It says, Dear Alex, the Beatles' ascension to the top rung of the rock and roll pantheon, displacing Elvis Presley and American rock legends who had a lock on the reins of rock and roll, was rigged and engineered into place by the British Crown and British military intelligence. For instance, in August 1963, at their first major television appearance at the London Palladium, the newspapers reported that police had to hold back 1,000 squealing teenagers, but this story was fabricated. The newspaper photo actually only tightly cropped 3 screaming teenagers and claimed it was 1,000. One reporter who was there later said there was less than 8 girls present. There was no riot by these frenzied teenage girls. Similarly, the Beatles' mania hysteria was manufactured at JFK Airport in February of 1964, when the Beatles arrived in the USA to perform for the Ed Sullivan Show. Busloads of girls from a Bronx school were paid by Beatles promoters to scream hysterically when the Beatles got off the plane and went into the terminal. It was a manufactured publicity stunt, but it paid off in priming the pump for the Ed Sullivan Show appearances, which did create a frenzied attitude among many American teenagers and set the stage for a looser rein on moral boundaries and opened the door for kids from decent middle-class families to start using drugs, which is precisely what British intelligence, Tavistock and the CIA had in mind all along. The clip from Dr. Coleman was, I played that on the show, the clip from Dr. Coleman was overall spot on and on target. And that's from Dave from Huddersfield, Yorkshire. Thanks very much, Dave. Sorry about the delay in actually reading your email out, but it's very relevant to tonight's show. Where do we start? There's so much to this that to try and condense it into a two-hour show just isn't really doing it justice. But I think what we've got to try and do is look how it affects us and how the New World Order or the Illuminati or the powers that be, the power elite, whatever you want to call them, have used the Beatles and the pop culture to create the type of society we've got now. But before we start, I should remind you to be aware that the views and opinions expressed on this show should not be taken as representative of Critical Mass Radio or the other shows broadcast upon it. I believe free speech is a freedom and not a privilege, and I intend to use that freedom to its maximum. If you don't believe in free speech and expression, then switch off. If you believe that free speech shouldn't be for everyone, or there should be parameters on freedom of speech, then off you fuck. But if, like me, you believe everyone should have a say, no matter how much we disagree with those views, then you've come to the right place, and that's the Razor's Edge Beatles Special, or the Occult Beatles Special. And when I say occult, you know, that doesn't necessarily, I know it can conjure up images of Satanism and devil worship and all that, but all occult really means is hidden. And I think that's what we're dealing with here when we talk about the Beatles. We're just dealing with hidden, or things that have been hidden from us, and we've been given and sold an idea that the Beatles were just four mop-tops from Liverpool who were extremely talented like no other people before them, and were able to create a whole raft of songs that not only changed our culture, but changed everything about the way we were living in the West, and perhaps globally. Yeah. So I suppose I'll start with sort of the cultural background to it all, because I don't know what the demographic of Critical Mass Radio is. From the very young, I would have thought, perhaps, to people who are getting on. But if you're my age, believe it or not, I'm too young to have been aware of the Beatles at the time they were out. I was born in the 60s, but yeah, I got into the Beatles in the 80s, when people were dressing up as Adamant and wearing lipstick and being new romantics with Duran Duran, you know, what Paul was doing. I was listening to the Beatles and that type of music. I liked stuff at the time. There was stuff I liked, but the Beatles for me were brilliant. I love the Beatles. So even if the Frankfurt School and the like created them, I loved them. So did it affect me? Perhaps, but I'm still here doing this show, aren't I? So anyway, yeah. But the legacy of the Beatles, or the legacy of the 60s, you know, is when the Beatles come out. Well, it was vastly important, wasn't it, for the development of society and culture, and what we commonly called, well, for want of a better term, civilized countries, and the changes that society underwent. Well, it makes the 60s the most crucial period of the 20th century. And it's a milestone we've got to look at in depth if we want to understand what followed and where we are now. The 60s, well, in many respects, they were revolutionary, weren't they? But not only, like I say, in the West with, you know, Europe and America, but perhaps in places like the East, in Japan, and less developed places like Africa and South America. But, you know, for us, I've got to concentrate on mainly, say, this country in America, really, Europe to a lesser extent. As I said, you know, the late 50s and the 60s, they brought about changes that were widespread geographically. But what distinguishes the 60s from other decades, well, the changes were also widespread demographically. They had an influence on a much wider spectrum of people than in any other decade, as I said, from the very young to the old. And what I mean by that is, well, before the 60s, before the Beatles, we didn't have the teenager. There was no such thing as a teenager. In fact, the term teenager didn't even exist. Basically, youth, or people under 20, were seen and not heard. You know, you had no right to have an opinion. You had no spending power as such. You were there to learn, listen to your elders, respect your elders, respect the framework of society we had then. You respected coppers, you respected the clergy, you did as you're told at school. You went into work with an apprenticeship or whatever, and you did as you were told. And that changed in the 60s. Suddenly, like I said, we had the teenager. they've got money in the pocket, they have an opinion. We had not only the pop culture, but we also had the rise of groups like the hippies, didn't we? And the drug culture that came with it, and the rage against the man or the system, and against the Vietnam War, especially in America, which the fight against the Vietnam War was basically led by the hippies, or the peace movement, wasn't it? Which, if you look at it now in retrospect, was the Vietnam War there to create a drug culture? Was resistance to the power elite or the powers that be the culture seemed to be taken up by hippies and the like? So ordinary, I'm not saying ordinary, I don't mean, when I say that, I don't mean that hippie or people that proclaim to be hippies aren't ordinary people, but people who were still mainstream, or, you know, wore a suit and tie for work, or, you know, did as they were told at work or school or college or whatever, just told the line, weren't part of that fight back against a corrupt system, or the system that was waging wars on countries for their resources. I know it sounds a bit convoluted, but in retrospect you can actually see that perhaps movements like the hippie movement were manipulated, as was the music of the 60s. Again, higher wages in the 60s. Workers had got rights unheard of in the past because they had to have, didn't they? After the Second World War, when how many of our people were slaughtered? 70 million, something ridiculous. The system had to be built up again. Britain and America were still industrial countries. We made things. We didn't import workers. We didn't, we made things and then exported. We didn't import goods. We made goods. Exported other nations to get well, we didn't. You know what I'm saying when I say that. The powers that be exploited other countries to get their resources to bring them to this country, so we, the peoples of Britain and America, could make things to sell to the rest of the world. Yep, not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but the peoples of this country in America had to get certain rights via the unions. We were given a health service, we were given money in our pockets, suddenly we were being listened to, the working class. The 60s produced an educated, thinking, middle and increasingly working class society that was, if you think about it from a powers that be perspective, it was a threat. They had to give us certain rights, but in so doing, they were educating us, weren't they? They were making us thinking. We were starting to see the bigger picture. So yeah, we were a threat to the New World Order. So what would you do if you were the New World Order? If you were the powers that be, you had to run the agenda, didn't you? You had to get us at each other's throats. You had to create division. You had to make, especially they always say, don't they? If you want to change anything, go for the young. So how do you do that? And the way, obviously, they used was music, and that brings us on to the Beatles, doesn't it? I'll tell you what I'll do. I could rabbit on and it would become a little bit boring, wouldn't it, if I just keep rabbiting on. But what I'll do is I'll play a bit more music, and I'll get back to this subject. But what I would like you to consider about the Beatles is they weren't the only ones, and there's a lot. And this subject is so multifaceted and goes down so many rabbit holes that for me to speak about this on one level it's just going to lead me to deeper and deeper levels. So bear that in mind. Just because I say that culture was hijacked in the 60s for a specific reason doesn't mean there wasn't a whole raft of other reasons behind it as well. But we'll get back to it. I'll tell you what, let's have a bit of Beatles before Paul died, and we'll get onto that later as well. Yeah, that's Dr. Robert from the Beatles, which, if you listen to the lyrics, was about acquiring drugs, the drug thing again. Yeah, when I was thinking about this over the last week about doing this show, I was trying to think of words that were relevant to the point I was trying to make about the 60s. and the effects that had the most impact on, especially this country, because let's face it, this is the epicenter for me. Everything seems to happen on this and spread around the world for me. We are the centre of the web, aren't we? We're the centre of the financial system. London is the powers that be's heartland, the City of London. Everything stems from here. And for me, the 60s, as I said, was the most pivotal time in certainly the history of this nation. And the words I came up with were affluence. Never, like I said before, perhaps a time when we were at our most well off as a people, although wealth was distributed the most. Downhill ever since. We had money in our pocket. Money was, and we had money to spend. The working class, we'd gone from living in slums before the war. After the war, you could tell the mood of the people when they voted the Tories straight out, despite the fact that Churchill had won the Second World War. And we all know that there's a lot more to that than meets the eye. And yeah, we were fighting for our rights, and we wanted those rights. And there was less of us, and they needed us to rebuild their system. And yeah, so we had more money in our pockets. Youth, again, this is another major word for me from the 60s. Youth were heavily targeted as a tool to change society. Goes without saying. From being at a time when kids were educated to a level, I don't think they'd ever been educated to that level previously. And I had to go on because, like I say, the society we had then, an industrialised country, needed us. They needed an educated working class, and certainly an educated middle class. So a very dangerous thing for them. They knew it was coming to an end. Their long-term plans were, of course, to deindustrialise Britain, and turn us into what we've become now, which is just a service culture where we just sell each other things. That was planned decades ago, a lot longer. So you can see that very dangerous period of the 60s and early 70s had to be a time when the powers that be had to throw a spanner in the works, and we can see exactly how they've done it. Drugs, another word that sprang to mind. Of course. And I know there are people that believe, that drugs are a good thing. They expand your consciousness and use it, in the right place at the right time. Are good. But if you're the power, again, step back from it, see the bigger picture. If you're the powers that be, of course you want people to be spending their cash on drugs when they have to, because, if they were legal, because Fanny Adams, but if they're illegal, it opens up all sorts of opportunities for a corrupt state, doesn't it? You get people criminal records on one level, don't you? You control the drug trade, bringing those drugs in. So you make millions and millions that never goes through the system but can be used for black projects. We've seen that in America. And we've seen it in this country, certainly. It's a difficult one. Personally, I don't bother with drugs. I think I've told you that. That's my personal choice. Doesn't mean I've got a negative view of drugs per se. I think the way that it's done now with the system being the drug pusher and our youth being the drug addicts, being sold stuff that is just basically dangerous. The promotion of cannabis to, in some circles as a consciousness, it opens your consciousness, etc. To a certain extent, that's probably true. But when it's mixed with all sorts of nonsense, what do they call it in Wales? Salt bar. It's just going to be a danger to your health, isn't it? And if you're controlling that, certainly you want youth addled and ill and useless and feckless, and of course you do. So certainly, if you're changing culture, you want drugs controlled by them, circulated into a system, working on so many levels. Equality is another word I came up with for the 60s, or at least the perception they sell us of what equality is. feminism. That women were sold in the 60s. That the family structure or being a mother is holding you back. It's a negative aspect to your life. It's control. It's manipulation. This is the powers that be feeding this. I mean, we've got it from Rockefeller's own mouth. They created feminism to just get more taxpayers on one level. And women fell for it. In fact, we all fell for it, didn't we? Because we all believe that everyone should have a go at a good career, or and we all fall for that, don't we? And then we lose sight of the fact that what are we here for? We're here for each other, aren't we? We're here for family, aren't we? We're here for procreation, aren't we? We're here for continuation of the species. Things that the power elite use when it suits them. And feminism was definitely a tool straight from the Frankfurt School, part of this cultural Marxism idea of equality, which isn't really equality. It's not equality at all. It's about creating latchkey kids, isn't it? It's about creating youths that have never had the family structure, so they become these feral, drug-addled idiots that currently blight our society now. And we all know them. All of those that live in working-class communities all can see the results of this cultural Marxism that started in the 60s. And we can kid ourselves all we like, but the reality is there to see. All these hood rats hanging about on street corners, smoking weed, terrorising old people, muggings, and the rest of it. That's come straight from the 60s. And the breakdown of family, and the breakdown of community, and the breakdown of thinking people, and dumbing us down, and so that we don't see the bigger picture about all this. Freedom, equality, you can call it the same sort of thing. 1967, the Abortion Act in this country, again, sold to us as freedom, as women's rights, when in effect what it has done has murdered upwards of 7 million of our brothers and sisters for profit, has given us the idea that we are a commodity to be used and abused, that we can put a value on human life, that we can use the fetus to sell to leech farms to give them a taste for human blood, that we can use and abuse our brothers and sisters in the womb by killing them and selling the organs, as we had with the older Hay Children's scandal a few years back, that we can use and abuse the child in the womb and kill it and then sell use it for stem cell research, which has ultimately led to this Frankenstein science of creating animal-human hybrids. And we've been that dumbed down and stupefied in these negative ideas of women's rights and feminism that we believe that we can't defend the unborn child, because if we do, we're not being right on, or we're not being politically correct. And yet the full picture is there for everyone to see, isn't it? And this is just my personal opinion. I'm not asking you to, agree with me, but all I would ask is, let's look at the bigger picture, people. Let's look at the bigger picture of all this. How the 60s completely, and some would say irretrievably, changed society into this dire morass we've got now. This hellhole that we call society, where most of us don't even leave the boxes we live in. We don't even know our neighbours. That we sit there in the house in front of the television watching a diet of junk culture forced down our throats, which is turning us basically into a shower of unthinking, moronic idiots. At best. At best. Do I blame all this on the Beatles? Certainly not. But it is a major pointer to where it's led us and where it is leading. I'll come back. I've got a bit more, and then we'll bring in our friends George and Phil, and we'll discuss in a lot more depth the Beatles and the nefarious influences on modern culture, us, and the final goal of the New World Order. Smashing. Right, so that's the first part I wanted to get over with, which was the cultural changes we saw in the 60s. I didn't go on specifically about the Beatles. They are one aspect of it, but a major part of it. And I think we should move on to them because, like I say, I love the Beatles. I love the Beatles music. I thought it was fantastic. And it was hugely upsetting for me to first hear the things I read about and I'm bringing to you tonight. The Paul is dead thing, I thought was unbelievable at first. Couldn't get my head around it, but the more and more I've looked into it, it just seems to make a lot of sense. Before I bring in Phil and George, because they've got, I feel they'll have really relevant points to make about this whole subject. I would just remind you, there are some pictures on the criticalmassradio.co.uk site if you're listening live, either on the site or via Blog Talk if you want to make your way to the site. There's some pictures on there which will illustrate what we're about to talk about. Like I said, if you right-click on a picture with your mouse rather than left-click it and choose Open Link in a New Window, that way you'll be able to have a closer look at the picture and the illustration that we're going to make rather than leaving the site, which would be bobbins, wouldn't it? George, are you with us?
Hi, Alex. You there, mate?
Great stuff. Phil, are you with us?
Hi, can you hear me all right, Alex?
Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear. Smashing. Right, chaps. You've heard where I've gone with the cultural effect on the 60s and thereafter, which has turned, I would argue, has turned us into the mess of a people that we've become. But before we move on to specifics, I just want to get your take on that, the cultural changes in the 60s. George, what do you think?
I think you're spot on, Alex. To me, the 60s were like a catalyst. It was definitely engineered and orchestrated, as you say, by the ruling criminal class. And for me, it reminds me, or is reminiscent of the messages they used in the opium wars with China. You know, when they flooded China with opium to destroy basically the people, to put them into a dumbed down drug state, so they didn't know states to basically defend anything that was happening, that the British Empire was carrying out. And it seems to me they've repeated the process in the 60s, or from the 60s really, via the music, via the drugs. The drugs, the LSD, etc. We all know, you don't have to research that a small amount, and you'll see that they were put through from the medical bodies at the time. Dr. Roberts, who was mentioned in the first song, was an establishment figure. He wasn't some, drug dealer on a street corner. And they were filtered down from the establishments through the groups, with the Beatles being the most prominent, and other groups, Stones, Who, etc., and the American groups as well. And
it became cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it did. It became cool to get high on LSD, and they used phrases. I think you'd be aware of Timothy Leary, a prominent figure at the time, who had a great influence and was a shadowy figure, but he was the one who phrased the term tune in and drop out, and he was basically paraphrasing what Alistair Crowley said, do as thou wilt. Do as thou wilt. That was where where a lot of it come from. I know you're familiar with that, isn't it, Alex?
No, you're spot on, George. Absolutely. And Philip, George is right there, isn't he? Because they do use drugs to, in effect, break up society, don't they? We only have to look at America with the Black Civil Rights Movement, which in the 60s was going fantastically well and making real change. And what happened? All of a sudden, drugs became phenomenally easy for people in the black community to get hold of. And what did it turn them into? Just shooting each other. Yeah. And it took their eye right off the ball. Don't know what you think, Philip. What's your take?
Well, the New Orleans advance, they had this music explosion, pop culture, planned in advance, and they had a motive for it. The motive was to control the population in an experiment and see how it would pan out, and then they had other agendas lined up in the following decades, and they were trying to create a consumer-orientated public that they could control and manipulate.
Exactly. Oh, it's exactly right, isn't it? Because in effect, the Beatles, it's not just the music, is it? It was like a propaganda war as well. It wasn't. It was like an attack on the culture of the time. You know, which perhaps we don't necessarily agree with a lot of the stuff of society of the time. And you know, just common decency would say that certain things had to end in the world. You know, things like apartheid and things like this ceiling that we had in this country, where if you weren't from the upper middle classes, you certainly didn't rise to management. You know, people were treated really badly. So, you know, certain change isn't a bad thing, but if you're controlling all aspects of that change, you certainly work it to your favour, don't you?
I think you hit on a pivotal word there, you know, Alex, when you said trendy, because everything in the 60s was a trend, and if you look at the Beatles, as you say, the music created a new genre. They were a self-contained musical unit, i.e. they played their own instruments, they performed their own music, they sang all the songs themselves, and they also composed the songs themselves. So that created the musical side of it, the dress sense side of it, all Carnaby suits, etc. The rest of the Western world, certainly, and it's still in effect today in China, Japan, etc. I only have to see that last weekend, the Massive Street Festival, how many from the Orient. I'm just, well, not just with that, at any time, but it's affected the world. In the music, the style of dress, which seemed to be freer after the Beatles, when they went from the nice little suits onto the hippie type dress and the way out stuff. And also in the 60s, it was the other thing over the free love. I just made a couple of notes, when you were speaking, Alex, and it was, to me, it was sort of like, at that time, what I'd refer, or I'd say, were boundary breakers, the likes of the pill, give girls. I'm not decrying it or promoting it, I'm just saying this is what happened in the 60s all around, like a catalyst at the same time. It gave girls that they were in a submissive position of, what if I get pregnant? They could go with whoever they like. Once the pill was introduced, do you know what I mean? Yeah. It was their choice. It wasn't the man who was sort of like, if you will, the dominant in the relationship. They could flip from whoever they wanted to. It gave them that freedom. I mean, the likes of television series and films, books, they were all boundary breakers. You know, if you look at the films from the 60s, the iconic movies, the iconic books that are still with us today, and the iconic TV series, it was all groundbreaking at that decade, and it led on what you mentioned over the likes of the workforce, spilled over into the 70s, and obviously all the industrial action that took place. That wouldn't have been that wouldn't have even been dreamt of in the 50s.
No.
It all came out of the 60s. Sorry.
I was just going to say they used the media as well, because they were in the media, so they could do whatever they liked and promoted things and basically hyped things up. And we believed that was down to popularity. It was just them hyping it up, and then I don't know if they controlled the police at the time, but the Beatles seemed to have a free rein until the press started putting their nose in. That might have been because they wanted to end the Beatles, end the whole 60s hippie scene, like they wanted to end everything.
Yeah, they were given free. Sorry, Phil. They were given free rein early doors, weren't they?
Yeah. And then it was just building up to something. But we didn't know at the time. Well, I was only little, but people were just enjoying it.
I think as well, Alex, I've just had a little point, is that with the drugs thing, is that they gave the music stars, the pop stars, I don't like using that expression, but the stars of that decade, godlike status, Hendrix, Brian Jones and the Stones, Jim Morrison, etc. And then they became victims of the drug culture, and they glorified it. These people, if you look at like I know some of my nephews and some friends still go to France to visit Jim Morrison's grave and treat him as a hero. He was a victim of a drug culture.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? No, what a horrible way to die so young.
Well, John Lennon, wasn't he? He was a heavy heroin addict.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
And there are some aspects of what he had to say that, the people will get on board with. Any normal, decent person would get on with a lot of what John Lennon had to say. You know, he spoke derisively, mockingly of Christianity and Christians, some of the things, you know, and we all sort of had that general feeling that religion, you know, is a control mechanism, and we can get on board with that. But I think you made the point, George, that he was also an admirer of Aleister Crowley.
Oh yeah,
you know, and Crowley's photo is on the Sgt. Pepper album, not once, but twice.
And it wasn't supposed to be there twice originally.
Exactly.
And I don't know whether you know, or the listeners are aware of the fact that Lennon actually they were supposed to be heroes of the band, and people associated with the band. The funeral party, if you like, as I would refer to it for Paul McCartney.
Well, should we just ask if people listening on the in the chat box or listening live at the minute on criticalmassradio.co.uk, at the top row of the photographs, middle photograph, if you left click it and open in a new tab, that is the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which is what George is making mention of.
Yes, I should have mentioned that, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. George, John Lennon said that him and Yoko started taking heroin at the time when they were feeling left out and treated poorly by the other Beatles and all the other Beatles staff and the press. So they needed some way to escape all that hatred. John Lennon said he set himself, he's quite a shy person, he just let them get on with it and didn't really, everybody was suffering inside. So they did stop it so many years later and tried other drugs. Yeah.
Crippled inside. Just go. Sorry, Alex. Just go back to the Sgt. Pepper cover and the hero aspect of it. That they were basically putting forward the band heroes from when they were younger and that period of time that they were at. And the one that John Lennon wanted on the cover of the Sgt. Pepper album was Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, I believe so.
And they just said there is no way that we'd be able to put his picture, and then you've got to think, even now, you wouldn't get away with it. But then in 1967, you know, he'd only like 20 years after the end of the Second World War, and his suggestion was to put Hitler. I don't know whether there was a bit of sarcasm or twisted wit with Lennon, or he was just serious about it. Yeah, but I know I agree with you. He was definitely heavily into or influenced.
Right. Yeah, of course, and we can see the definite cultural manipulation that the Beatles were used to bring about. I think we can all agree on that. But to go on to the cover of Sgt. Pepper, exactly what you were saying. It brings together all sorts of people that have that they said that were their heroes. You know, there's also why Johnny Weissmuller would be a hero of the Beatles. Diana Dawes. Was it Diana Dawes? Was it?
Yeah. Not Diana Dawes. Jane Mansfield.
Jane Mansfield, was it? Was that?
I think is it on the far
on the cover.
right as we would look at it?
Okay.
Is it or is it Diana Dawes? I'm not sure.
I thought it was Diana Dawes.
Yeah, Diana Dawes. Sorry.
And Jane Mansfield, do it.
I know she's somewhere there. Yeah.
Leave.
But the cover of Sgt. Pepper's, which will bring us on to our next subject, is in fact a grave, isn't it? It depicts the side of a grave.
Beatles, yeah.
And
a funeral.
A funeral, yeah.
Aye.
At the side of a grave, and this is where we come into the Paul is dead conspiracy, because the story goes that regardless of the creation of the Beatles via the Frankfurt School and the cultural Marxism aspect, we also had the fact that the Beatles didn't write their songs. They were written for them by people that worked within the Frankfurt School, namely Theodor Adorno, who was a major member of the Frankfurt School and was for some time leader of the London Philharmonic Orchestra in this country, a master of the 12 atonal system, which is a system of music which apparently has a major effect on the human psyche and human emotions. And this is from his own words, Theodor Adorno.
Yeah.
So to get on to the next stage is that the Beatles weren't these talented young lads from Liverpool that came together and changed the world musically. What they were was the first created band, the first boy band, if you like, manufactured, created to sell an image, and that image has been used to change culture. But things didn't go particularly well, because in 1966 one of the band died in a car crash, and that was the original Paul McCartney in November of 1966. And the rest of the Beatles who were left, namely John Lennon and George Harrison, I don't think so much Ringo Starr, at this stage perhaps realised that they were being manipulated and were being controlled and used for a certain purpose, and the death of Paul woke them up to that, and the fact that the powers that be decided, rather than just let Paul die and the Beatles die with them, that they would replace the original Paul McCartney with a double. And from Sgt. Pepper's onwards, that double took the original Paul McCartney's place. And the original Beatles decided to try and get the word out that had happened via their album covers and certain clues in the music, which takes us onto a whole new subject. But there are clues in the Sgt. Pepper's album, aren't there?
Certainly are, yeah. You can see them all over the place. You got it to Paul McCartney's death, yeah. Yeah, as you say, over the grave at the bottom where the Beatles is spelt out in red flowers, just below that.
Yeah.
Below that is the left-handed Hofner bass, the shape of the left-handed Hofner bass that McCartney used. And if you were able to, on the screen, if you had a physical hard copy of the album or the image, if you turned it a full 80 degrees vertically, the guitar and the flowers also spells out Paul, and a question mark at the end of it.
Exactly.
But there's the thing that the image that you put on the site as well, Alex, of the mirror split image,
on the drum,
in the centre on the drum.
Yeah.
It can be read two ways actually. It actually says at the end of it, he died, and the diamond, which is two arrows, one pointing
to the grave.
One pointing to the grave and one pointing directly up to McCartney.
Yeah.
But the lonely becomes either the stated date of his death, the 9th. It's got a 10, a 1 and a 9, which is 11, the 9th of November, or it turns into, I think of, what's the other, there's another connotation to that, isn't it, to the lonely, Alex? I can't quite remember now.
It's 9/11,
you mean?
Yeah, the 9th of the 11th month, the 9th of November.
5 o'clock in the morning as the day begins.
Yeah, that's on the reverse.
That's right, Phil, yeah. And you see that if people who are on the Critical Mass site, second row, middle picture, which is the reverse of the Sergeant. Is it the reverse or the inside cover? I think it might be the reverse, mightn't it? Where they have the lyrics to the songs. You've got
the gatefold cover.
It was a gatefold cover, yeah. And you've got George Harrison.
I think we broke up a little bit there, Alex. Sorry. I don't know.
Hear me all right?
Yeah, I can now. I don't know if it was just me or it went out to the listeners. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I know you were mentioning the reverse side.
Yeah. Where the lyrics are printed, you've got George Harrison pointing at a line in a lyric from She's Leaving Home, which says Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock, which is when apparently the real Paul McCartney died. And we just want to say that he was replaced with a double, but apparently they'd had some years earlier they'd had a talent a lookalike competition, a talent competition to and they found someone who was looked remarkably like Paul McCartney and was a very, very talented musician. So the person they did get to replace the original Paul McCartney wasn't
just some
fella off the street. He was a talented musician. Why they'd have to replace?
Why? That's the question.
Yeah, but if we look at why they had to, as I said before, the Beatles were pivotal in this cultural change. It was still the mid-60s. They still had a lot of work to do. To lose them at that time might have ended that cultural change, because they were working with other bands like the Rolling Stones, etc. But the Beatles were the ones that were conquering the world, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
No, sir. I was just going to say at the time. See, well, I've heard about this for years and years and years over the McCartney conspiracy, and I just dismissed it out of hand. To be perfectly honest, I think I mentioned that to you, Alex.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
When I first heard it. And it's only over the years when I started, because I thought to myself, I dismissed it out of hand without actually looking into it. And when I started looking into it, I was looking into it to dismiss it out of hand again. But the more and more I looked into it, and I'm still not saying I'm 100% convinced, but the more and more I look into it, it does hold water. The actual theory does hold water. And for me, when you go back to when you mentioned the writing of the material, I think if it may come about as such as Alan Watt, who was experienced in the music industry, explained, and it still goes on to this day, maybe the Beatles did go through the Hamburg thing, everything else. They were writing their own songs, putting the tunes together, the same as I did with the band I was with when I was a teenager. Lots of bands do. And then they were brought into the fold, as you say, by Adorno and George Martin, was why a classical musician would be put in charge of musical direction of four ordinary lads playing guitars. I don't know, but that's the way it worked out. And their songs, maybe they have these She Loves You and what have you songs, very nice lads, nice tunes, and then the development coming then, where you, as you say, like the ghostwriters, if you will, of the major songs of the manufacture of the product, the Beatles, to use as a vehicle to change the culture, which it did. There's no doubt that the Beatles changed the culture, not just the musical culture, the whole culture of the 1960s, and that's where the manufacture, the engineering side or the orchestration side of it, if you will, came in. They took the image, took the self-contained musical unit, added to a base level of them strumming a few chords and what have you, and elaborated it and made it into this the magical music, experience that it was of the 60s. Well,
you can't deny, I don't know what you think, Phil, but you can't deny Adorno's definite dealings with the Beatles, because he owned the rights to Beatles music, didn't he, up until his death, and then Michael Jackson bought them.
I agree with George's view on the Paul is Dead story. I mean, I only found out about 3 years ago on YouTube, and I was very intrigued by it. And eventually I bought the story, and I thought, well, yes, that's what they're up to, and, a double and deception, Satanism, occultism, and but then I started to take a step back, and I'm not sure now. Now I think, yes, there's a big deception going on, but I'm trying to work out what the motives are, and how the powers that be have give him this mileage, and I just think he's still knocking about. He knows there's an occult underbelly in the record industry, and he doesn't want to rock the boat. But he knows that it's going to give him some grief anyway. He just wants an easy life.
I think for the benefit. Sorry, Phil.
I
think for the benefit of the listeners, Alex,
Yeah.
if they would have done like you would have probably mentioned this later on in the show, but the two videos that you sent to me, one Cranberry Sauce and the other one the Winged Beetle.
Yeah.
I think if they watch them two videos, about 3 hours total, I think 2.5 hours, but there is just one 5 or 6 second section in there.
Sorry, George, a quick one there for you though, with the Wings Beetle, which is the Scarab Beetle. Which is, and the Scarab Beetle rolls stones or dung, so you always get this occult sort of, as I said before, we mentioned the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, they can't help themselves.
So you they can't help themselves, can they? So,
no, they can't, can they?
So, you've definitely got the Illuminati influence there with the occult symbolism. Sorry,
it was just for the listeners' benefit to say, at the end of one of them videos, or not at the end, maybe wherever it is in one of them videos, Paul McCartney, which is looks like a recent, maybe not last year, but not that long ago, is being interviewed. I think it's on Letterman, and Letterman put it right to him about blah blah blah. In the late '60s, the ruins going on about you being killed, and McCartney says in a fashion, I'm him. They were looking for this replacements. Yeah, I'm the replacement, and starts laughing in the way McCartney's horrible way is. but you slow the film down, and you can see the way his eyes move, and it's like when you catch a liar, and they're looking around to see if I convince people here, and to me, it was too much, Alex. You know what I mean? I thought to myself.
Well, at the time, when that interview took place, the idea you sent me the link of those two Italians that were doing evidence based on computer-enhanced forensic techniques, and they come up with some astonishing evidence for the fact that they just weren't the same people. The original Paul McCartney and this fella, and they did high precision measurements of Paul McCartney's skull from various photos of his face, both before and after, and they just don't link. They just don't match at all.
What we would call biometrics today.
Yeah.
The distance between his pupils. His
eyes changed colour for one.
Yeah.
It went from being a brown-eyed lad to now he's got these. Do your eyes change colour as you get older? I don't know, but he had brown eyes when he was young, and now he's got these sort of green eyes. So. Mine
have gone red. I think that's the dream.
Going black if you carry on.
There's so much photoshopping going on. You don't know unless you actually saw them face to face. You might not know they can play around with all these images. But if it is all true, then the story seems to fit.
Yeah. Well,
but that's what the more you look into it, the more you see.
Well, there's a few photos on Critical Mass Radio at the bottom there. If you look at the photographs there, you've got different ears, and ears like fingerprints. No people's ears are the same, and the ears from before '66 and after they look decidedly different, or enough to make you wonder. Anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And
there is lots. Sorry, George.
No, go on.
There is lots of evidence out there that people have looked at. But I think the Paul is Dead story it's got a lot of depth to it. But for me, it's a rumor with a motive to plant seeds. So it started off as part of the plan, but it's like somebody interfered in the recordings to make these. Or the Beatles did them themselves under order, or they're just like playing around with the back masking, they're playing records backwards,
leaving clues in the music.
Yeah, leaving clues. Just
and
as
on that
I'm not sure.
On that point, Phil, I'll tell you what we'll do, chaps. I have got a little bit of audio that does give some examples of the Beatles leaving You might not pick up on them all, but if we listen to them, chaps, perhaps we can point some out. But this does give some of the examples that from Sgt. Pepper's onwards, this is, of the remaining Beatles giving clues that Paul died in 1966 and was replaced with a double. And the reason that bit was played at the end, because right in the background, you can hear the new Paul shouting, "I'm really, really dead," although he might not have been make it out. What do you think, chaps? Did you pick up any more in that clip?
Yeah, there's a few in the clips, especially when the music slipped down a bit. I didn't notice that.
Revolution number 9, when played backwards, says "Turn me on, dead man."
Yeah.
A Day in the Life is basically telling you how Paul died. You know, he blew his mind out in a car. He hadn't noticed that the lights had changed.
And
another one. I don't know if you know when at the end of the Sgt. Pepper album, vinyl album, if you play it in reverse, it says something strange like, "You will all be fucked by Superman."
Yes, possibly. When the Nephilim come.
Language. But it's like saying, you know, that's what's going to happen.
Well, the warnings were there, weren't they? I mean, they got away with it for so long, and then it had to stop, didn't it? Because, they split the Beatles up.
Yeah.
Via Yoko. You see, it works on some levels. Were they aware of the full picture of the Beatles? Did they know, of the full manipulation? Were they? If you were offered the chance as 4 young lads to be thrown onto a world stage, glory, women, wine, women, and song, how many of us would knock it back at that age? But as you got older, and you realised you were being lauded for stuff that wasn't your talent really, and it probably would get a bit sickening, wouldn't it? And if you were fairly intelligent, despite being drug-addled, you would perhaps, especially when you see one of your friends killed and then replaced by a double, perhaps you would start to fight back a bit.
I think, if you don't mind me putting in, George, the Beatles were given, were managed by Brian Epstein very strictly, but once it got about 65, Rubber Soul, they were given the sort of artistic control of the albums, so John Lennon said, and everything else, which would mean like everything to do with the cover, the studio,
Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Though they would say that, wouldn't they? What else could he say? We're totally manufactured. None of the music's ours, and everything's is just one big con.
Offer them a lot of money, you know.
Exactly. But the novelty is
we'll give you total control to change the world, and we'll help you change the world. Well, they can only go on acting for so many years, though, can't they? If that was the case, and then they get sick of it.
Exactly.
But Yoko Ono is a interest in development from late 1966 onwards.
Well, was it though, Phil? My point. Was it their interest, or was it a package being sold to the people? Based on this, for the hippie movement, this spiritual thing where you, rather than doing stuff, you meditate, or you sit there cross-legged, or you expand your consciousness, but at the same time, the powers that be are kicking fuck out of us, to use a vernacular. Was that a ploy? Was it forced upon the people as an alternative?
Maybe it wasn't as obvious, but it was there. They knew what they were doing, so the Beatles wouldn't know that there was some New World agenda. They would just say, "Well, we're doing it for the money. We'll do it as long as we don't get harmed."
Yeah. But as things went on, Phil. But as things went on, obviously, they've got fat wads of cash. You get comfortable. You get time to think. Your mind control might break down to a certain extent. You've lost a friend who's been replaced. You start to rebel a bit, don't you? You start to see the bigger picture. And John Lennon, certainly, towards the end of his life, was, just from seeing his writings and some of the interviews he did, certainly was starting to see the bigger picture, wasn't he?
The underbelly of the record company, we don't know anything about them and their connections with the media and the establishment and the elite families. It's just a rabbit hole.
It is. We're scratching the surface.
We know how they've done it because they've told us how they've done it. They bring in hangers on, people like Adorno, these engineers, all the tricks of the trade, copying bits of other songs, all the double tracking, backwards, this promotion, how to promote your song with controversy. The Beatles learned all this. They learned as they went on, and in the end, some group of people wanted to end it, like they ended the hippie movement. They wanted to end the lot and bring in something else.
Well, that's how they work, isn't it? That is their MO. I mean, things suit them for certain periods. Religion, of all hues, suited the power elites and the Illuminati for donkey's years, because there was, we didn't have television and radio, etc. So the method of control was religion. Religion now has served its purpose. There's no need for it anymore. Get rid. They've got the new toys to play with now to control the manipulators.
And Beatles were the new religion at that time, round about that time.
Yeah.
They were bigger than God.
Exactly. But the clues, and to get back to the clues, like I said, I honestly believe that the mind control, if that's what they were under, and I believe to a certain extent they were, they'd have to be to go, you can be sold an idea, but only for so long. And there was catalysts, I believe, that led to them leaving clues. We start with the Sgt. Pepper's album, obviously. We've made mention of them. Just a quick one, that doll that's on the on Critical Mass Radio there, the picture of the doll shows a car that Paul McCartney was driving when he died, a blood-stained glove by her side.
So they knew the story, and they knew what the clues were. So it must have been the Beatles, unless,
They probably did have input, didn't they? They perhaps just, I don't know. Perhaps they couldn't. They openly admitted that they couldn't write music. As in writing down crotchets, waivers, that sort of thing. They had no clue. So it was all about just putting it all together in the studio with the help of George Martin and such. But perhaps with the imagery, perhaps there was some input. But also, obviously, there was input from the powers that be. But there's certain things you probably could get away with.
Just on that point, Alex, I'd say with me coming from a musical background, I don't need music. I can't need dots.
Yeah, surprised how many can't. Surprised how many can't.
But you can play it, loads it, or whatever. But I can put a song together. I can write a song, put it together, and play the instruments on the song. So that side of it is, see, this is where I'm walking two paths on this, because I'm undecided. Because one side tells me, not because the Beatles, I like the Beatles or from Liverpool or anything else, just the musical side of it. What they achieved musically, i.e. in songwriting, I can believe quite easily that can be achieved by any person at all, because it's only in the being, a lot of it is being in the right place at the right time, and the music getting ahead. If you listen to something like Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, if somebody was going to orchestrate and write something with impact musically, then that for me, I'd go, that song has everything from classical music right away through to pop. But on the other side of it, I can see from the 60s what I know and what I've read and my own information I've got. Each era, or the zeitgeist as it was, the spirit of the age, has been manipulated, and they told us that in the publication of the documents. That's actual fact. So the 60s to me were engineered, orchestrated, manipulated and packaged for the purpose as what you went through brilliantly in the first 20 minutes, half hour of your show, to change the culture, to the breakup of the family, etc. What we've covered, the introduction of the pills, the drugs, everything else. So I can go walk down that path, but on the music side of it, I can also say, yeah, you know, the songs could simply have come about, and if there was any influence of drugs in there, which we've seen with other bands, like the way, you know, for the last 60, probably over 60 years. I mean, if you go back to the 1930s, the blues artists, they were heavily influenced by drugs and by alcohol. And some of the things they came out with, you still can't understand today. So I can see that, the musical side of it, but I can see the manipulation side of it as well. And I can see the point of why they would want to keep the Beatles going. If that did by accident happen to Paul McCartney, I could see them going, yeah, let's keep this going. We've got these. This is it. This is going to change the culture, what we want. So why let a good thing go to waste? Let's put somebody else in. Let him get on with all his mad things of his songwriting. The songwriting from the end of Revolver, the last song, Tomorrow Never Knows, is sort of like a departure from the Beatles in the nice little suits and the mop tops and everything to the Beatles of the Sgt. Pepper era. Yeah. The very last song.
Which has been described as, because I take your point.
Like two different bands, isn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. But there was good stuff. But I take your point about a talented musician can write good songs, right? There's no denying that. You don't have to read and write music to produce. We've seen that with like the Oasis, and you know they can't write music, and they've wrote some really good tunes. You know, whether they've nicked them off the Beatles or the riffs off the Beatles is another argument. But they have written some good stuff. But the point is from like Sgt. Pepper, I don't know what you think about this, Phil, but the point is from like Sgt. Pepper onwards is that some of it stands up with classical music. It's been described as classical music that, you know, transcends pop.
I think the Beatles...
Sorry, Phil. Sorry.
I think the Beatles got clever and had more time in the studio. They say, right, we want orchestra here. George Martin suggests something. But I was just thinking about the timeline of when Yoko Ono again, when she allegedly met John Lennon in late 1966, and then around that time Paul McCartney allegedly died, and then Sgt. Pepper came out, and then Cynthia divorced John, and Paul McCartney left Asher split up with Paul McCartney, and then Brian Epstein died.
Yeah.
And you know, and then the album came out. So all within several months. I suppose things do happen like that, but
yeah. But if the Jane Asher thing, well, it goes without saying, doesn't it? I mean, she wouldn't stay with him because it wasn't her chap, was it? It was someone who'd, you know, been replaced.
A similar thing happened with Lennon, didn't it? It sounds like they seem to outgrow the teenage sweethearts. And with Cynthia Lennon,
right,
he seemed to go right off. But on that point over Yoko, I think you'll be aware of it, Alex, is that Yoko Ono was supposed to have come out of the blue. It was sort of a chance meeting with John Lennon, etc. Yet McCartney himself, whether it be the real one or the duplicate, did say he'd met Yoko Ono before John Lennon was introduced, or never wasn't even introduced to it, before he met her. Paul McCartney was well aware of her, and I'd met her.
He was involved in the Indica Gallery, like a shop and little art gallery below, run by Barry Miles, who was an author, and he was the editor of the International Times, which was the sort of groundbreaking counterculture underground movement newspaper, which had a poked fun at the establishment and encouraged drug taking. Fair enough, it was very revolutionary at the time. So Yoko Ono managed to come over to London, and she was invited to have a little exhibition there. John Lennon was invited in, and then he met her, and then he was with her everywhere ever since. You could say that he might have been mind controlled, and she was the handler. I've heard that before, but
Yeah.
there's so much in love, though. Is it possible?
It begs the question: did Paul McCartney die as a result of an accident, or was he killed because?
Or was he reborn? Like a golden dawn, like Aleister Crowley thought about the golden dawn. It could have been ushering in a new golden dawn society, or it could have been an experiment to show us what it was going to be like in the future, in the 21st century, the new world order.
Blimey. And I'll tell you what, Phil, on that bombshell,
20 years ago today.
We'll have a little bit more music, and we'll come back to that, and we'll just have a few more looks at the clues in some of the later album covers. Thanks, chaps.
CMR Critical Mass Radio is a completely non-profit station where the hosts pay to broadcast their shows. The mission of the station is to get as much information as possible out to people about the world we live in, to unite like-minded people, and to try to come up with workable solutions. If you agree with the work that we are doing, then please feel free to help us continue by making a donation on the webpage. CMR is for people who want answers, because now it is our turn.
Yes, chaps, to get back to it, Phil, just to carry on with that point you were making. I suppose you're going back to the occult symbolism aspect of it all, aren't you? They're sort of telling each other, aren't they?
I'm just saying they use the same kind of message process.
Yeah.
Then they use the music and the popular culture, newspapers, everything, television. Wanted everybody to have a television. Now they use the internet. So, and YouTube and things like that, Wikipedia, and television as well, I suppose, and music.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, but like I say, from Sgt. Pepper's onwards, chaps, the album covers, it's open to interpretation, I suppose, some of it, but there does seem to be clues that Paul was replaced, isn't there? I mean, we've mentioned the ones in the Sgt. Pepper's album, which was the first album after Paul allegedly died. Then we have Magical Mystery Tour, don't we? Which I just played a track from, which was I Am the Walrus, and the walrus is an ancient, is it a Norse symbol of death?
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know which Beatle was the walrus. They played games with us, saying it's Paul or it's John. We don't know for certain.
Well, from the White Album, there was a song, Glass Onion, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Where John Lennon says that the walrus was Paul.
Right.
There's a clue for you all.
That's still confused.
Yeah. And another symbol of death is the hand above the head.
Mm-hmm.
Which
all of that, it's true. Whoever put all those clues in knew all about the cult and stuff. Must have studied it. I think it was Paul. Paul was running the show after Brian Epstein died, so the other Beatles just went along with it because, well, as long as they could get their songs, and they still wanted to produce something brilliant, the pinnacle album. and then they wanted more after that, and then, you know, they just got tired of it.
Mm.
Maybe they got tired of all the lies and the dirty side of the music industry, and the fact that they were like starting to think ahead. They wanted to be themselves instead of a Beatle.
Yeah.
And Frank Zappa said they were only in it for the money. He did a Sgt. Pepper type cover, taking the mickey out of the Beatles.
And Frank Zappa, sorry Phil, Frank Zappa incidentally was a student of Adorno.
Yeah.
And sort of a diplomat type, military intelligence, so to say, with connections to Washington.
Aren't they? The connections are definitely there. The like I say, from the Magical Mystery Tour, we had the walrus theme, which is a symbol of death, and the walrus was Paul. Then we went on to Yellow Submarine album cover, which again on the front cover shows John Lennon making the horned devil sign.
Yes.
Paul's head again, sign he's dead. There's photos in the album sleeves inside the album cover. Same sort of thing, especially on the Magical Mystery Tour. Again, hands above Paul's head. Then we move on to Abbey Road, of course, the famous scene on the Pelican Crossing outside the studios, where we have the 4 Beatles crossing the road on the Pelican Crossing, and the clues there, aren't they?
The white car again.
There's the white Beetle, apparently, which Paul was driving when
Volkswagen Beetle.
Volkswagen Beetle, sorry, with the number plate which says 28 if.
28 if.
He would have been 28 when that album was released. You have the 4 Beatles crossing the road. You have John Lennon leading the front in a white suit. The
Holy Man.
The Holy Man. Then you have Ringo following suit as all in black as the pallbearer. Then you have Paul minus his shoes, which is a sign, which is how people are buried. Incidentally, he's holding his cigarette in his right hand, and he was left-handed.
And he's out of step with the rest of them.
He's out of step with the rest of them. Well done, George. Followed up there with George Harrison in denim. He's the grave digger, isn't he? Yeah.
Right.
That's up to you, chaps. People listening, understand what you make of that, but the clues do seem to be there. On the rear of the Abbey Road album, again, we have a few clues. You've got some on the top left of the album cover. You've got dots, which next to the word Beatles, which if you link them together makes the number 3, which means 3 Beatles. Which is left. Top right, where the barcode is a silhouette of Paul's face taken from a photo before he allegedly died.
That's correct.
So the clues are there's also some in the songs of Abbey Road. There's some clues. Maxwell's silver hammer. Maxwell apparently was the copper who was in charge of the he was the handler for the Beatles, apparently. He was the one that threatened them that if they didn't stay in line they'd be topped, hence the song Maxwell's Silver Hammer. Incidentally, people listening to this via podcast or live in the chat room, some videos that we'd encourage you to watch are on YouTube. You can get them. There's the Winged Beetle, which is fantastic for all this sort of stuff. And Cranberry Sauce, there's another one, again, which goes into a lot more depth than we ever can about all this subject. Cranberry Sauce apparently is what John Lennon said he was saying when people said, it was in the background. What song was that, Phil? Can you remember?
Strawberry Fields.
Sorry, yeah, it was John.
Strawberry Fields. I buried Paul.
He's saying I buried Paul, but
John said I buried Paul.
That's right, and he later said no, I was saying Cranberry Sauce. Yeah. Let It Be album, which is also there for people to see. You have the 4 Beatles. The only one that has a red background is Paul McCartney.
Mm-hmm.
All the others at a different angle as well. They're looking away from him with white backgrounds. Strange that should be the case, shouldn't it? You know. But,
yes.
So yeah, we can see the symbolism, can't we? And we can see that they probably were trying to give clues. I mean, you can sort of interpret them as you could put up an argument that they're just coincidental as such, but taken as a whole, there does seem to be a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
If we move on to after the Beatles split, certainly the music changed, didn't it? They were never apart from perhaps with John Lennon with Imagine. He had a lot of success with that, didn't he? But the music certainly wasn't on a par with the stuff that they were doing as a unit.
Yeah.
The symbolism seems to carry on, and the clues as well in McCartney's albums with Ram and a couple of the others. The clues in and I think he was fond of doing non-de-plumes and pseudonyms. McCartney, wasn't he? The Fireman was one. There was a couple of others. And actually, Alex, I think this is a to be continued, isn't it?
I told you we'd only scratch the surface.
We've covered nothing, have we?
No, not really.
That'll be a to be continued thing. Sorry, Lee, go on.
That's I don't know what you like. You made the point there that it did continue, and certainly with Paul McCartney. I think, or the replacement William Shears or William Campbell, which that's supposedly who it was. He also left clues in some of the albums, especially the album covers.
And in his film, Paul McCartney, Give My Regards to Broad Street, he's referred to as William. Yeah.
That's weird. And then you've got, and I'll give us another quick tune, which is a John Lennon song, actually, from his first solo album. And if you listen to the lyrics on this, I think he's more or less saying to the replacement that you're not what you're meant to be, and it's how do you sleep? And it's sad, really, because there's so much more to this, you know, that there's the thing with the Manson murders, wasn't there? Yeah. You know, with Helter Skelter, and the way that it works on so many levels, the Beatles music. Not only does it, you know, does it affect our consciousness, the way we think, the way we view each other, it also affects us on a psychological level, obviously, or some people, you know, on a psychological level. Could the MK Ultra type people be have been using Beatles music to trigger certain murderers or assassins? Or,
exactly.
You know.
I think, as you said, Alex, or as I said myself, I should say, this is to be continued. Alex, can I just track on just one thing, which I think is an important point, you know, which you meant to bring up earlier on. We're going back to the 1966, November the 9th, when McCartney was supposed to have had the accident.
Yeah.
A couple of months previous to that, and it relates to the meeting of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and what I refer to that, that Paul McCartney had contact with Yoko Ono well before John Lennon. Yeah, John Lennon and all of them said, oh no, you know, we only just met. There was a character around that time who was heavily involved in the avant-garde scene, and this person organised the competition, the look-alike competition for Paul McCartney. This was before the accident was reported. This was earlier on, pre-November 1966. Now this man's name, he was like a rash over everything with regard to, I say, the avant-garde scene and connections with the Beatles all over. Yeah. Now this man's name, and it's in the newspaper articles from the time, from the period, is Ian Iachimo.
Yep.
Now Ian Iachimo, if spoken, and this has been tested by a recording studio engineer, Ian Iachimo, spoken into a microphone and played backwards reads or sounds like Paul McCartney. Yeah, the weird one, isn't it?
Says it all. So did they plan Paul's death?
You wrote that writer as well. It's on the written lyrics as well. Ian Nakamura. He did a lot of things around that time. So it was Paul really, whoever, or somebody pretended to be Paul.
Was Paul's? See, that begs the question: was Paul the real Paul McCartney's control breaking down, and he had to be gotten rid of because he was a wild card, but they saw it coming and.
So many connotations.
So many, yeah. And like I say, chaps, we're not even scratching the surface. But we haven't got much time left. But the one thing I just want to clear up before we do go is obviously the Beatles split up in '69. Was it? Yeah, '69. And I suppose they had to keep the secret. They couldn't, just because the Beatles had split up doesn't mean that they could go willy-nilly telling everyone. But the signs were there, I suppose, that John Lennon was starting to get fed up with it and wanted to tell the truth. We see signs of it, like I said earlier on, in some of the statements he made and some of the interviews he did. He was definitely starting to talk about the military-industrial complex and how they control everything. Certainly still coming out with stuff, that we can see now is control and everything. But I want to get your opinions. Was he taken out in 1980 by these people?
I would say definitely he was taken out. He was silenced. Even all the so-called coincidences with Mark Chapman and everything else catching the eye, the Manchurian candidates, etc. That it's the same. It goes back to Bobby Kennedy, and it's so many all these coincidences. It's just, what I mean. It's just too many, isn't it?
Yeah. So they like to sacrifice famous people that they put on a pedestal, and then just destroy them like they do in Hollywood.
Yeah. Build them up and knock them down.
Oh, yeah.
With regards to Lennon as well, though, he made a comment in 1969, and two things regarding 2012 actually. Lennon said, the children of 2000 will still be listening to the Beatles, and he said in 2012, Paul will be like Jesus, a Jesus figure. That was in 1969, and Neil Aspinall, who was long-time friend of the Beatles and personal assistant, he died in 2008, and he wrote a manuscript, I think it was entitled Living with the Beatles, and his implicit instructions were, for some reason, don't release this manuscript because it tells the truth until 4 years after my death. Now I've been researching it and I can't find it that it's been released yet, which would make it 2012.
Yeah.
It's weird, isn't it?
It's beyond strange, isn't it? It's George Harrison, of course. Same again. Was he warned? Was it in 1985? He was stabbed, wasn't he?
Yeah.
For no reason, apparently. Just a random stabbing. Was he warned off again? Was he getting itchy feet? He's seen, two of his friends taken out. He's getting on a bit. Is it time to, tell the truth?
Yeah, not take the truth.
Yeah, I think so.
Grave.
Eventually he dies of cancer, doesn't he?
Yeah.
But from what we know, you can be given cancer, can't you? And all you're left with then is sort of, obviously the double for Paul McCartney's not going to say anything. So all you're left with is Ringo Starr, who was never the sharpest knife in the cutlery box, was he? Let's face it. You always got the feeling that he was there by luck rather than talent.
You wanted the easy life, Ringo.
The luckiest man in the world.
Exactly. And apparently a lot of the drumming on some of the albums wasn't even done by Ringo Starr. They got people in to do it, because he wasn't that capable.
Alex, Lennon's famous saying when he was asked about Ringo Starr, do you think Ringo Starr is the best drummer in the world? He said, Ringo Starr's not even the best drummer in the Beatles.
Yeah.
That says it all.
Scout's wit. I say what we'll do, chaps. We're coming to the end. It's been fantastic, and like I said, we haven't even scratched the surface, have we? There's so much more to this. There's so many other layers that we could be peeling away, which in 2 hours you just can't do, can you?
Mm.
So it might be worth thinking about doing a follow-up. Who knows? We'll work on it. But I'd like to thank you, chaps, because you've been excellent. Your breadth of knowledge is astounding. And you made a real contribution to tonight, and I really want to thank you for that. Thanks, Phil, and thanks, George.
Been a pleasure, Alex. Pleasure, Alex.
I'll have you end at your end, and we'll say good night.
Okay, see you later, mate. See you later, Phil.
See ya.
Okay, chaps. Like I said, there was so much more we could have got in, but we're never going to do it in 2 hours, so it's certainly worth thinking about in the future if we're going to do a follow-up. And who knows, we might do get away from the usual diet of swearing, bile and vomit, as this show was once described. Email, it's razorsedge@criticalmassradio.co.uk. Just a quick word on tomorrow night, Thursday night, which of course has now become known as Scouse Night. It's not an excuse to, put on a curly wig, grow a moustache, wear a shell suit. It means tune into Critical Mass Radio and listen to the Cry Freedom Show with Lisa and the Prisoner Show with George, who's just been on the Razor's Edge show with me. Great stuff. Really looking forward to that. I love Scousers. I really do. I'm not the typical mank who's got no time for them lot. Fantastic. Really enjoyed tonight. So, if you enjoyed tonight's show, it was the Razor's Edge show. If you didn't, it was the Critical Mass show with Paul Giovanni. I'll leave you with a final Beatles tune and wish you all a very good night. Thanks, chaps. See you later.